Welcome to Silent Flame Stories.
The Soul Night was a tapestry of electric rain. It fell in silver sheets against the huge windows of Park Jin-ho's study. It blurred the millions of city lights below into a watery galaxy. From this high place, the chaos was silent and orderly. It was an illusion of control Jin-ho had spent 20 years building, brick by bloody brick. Power, he had learned, did not wear a crown. It wore silence. And in that silence, Park Jin-ho was king. His name was not in the newspapers. It was the reason the newspapers were written. It was not spoken in government offices. It was the unspoken condition for every deal. His empire was built not on loud strength, but on a deep understanding of human weakness, greed, fear, and the desperate love for one's own family. He traded in secrets. His vaults held the hidden truths of powerful men. Rivals did not fall. They simply vanished. Their ambitions were quietly absorbed into the world Jin-ho managed. The city moved at the speed he allowed. People said he had no soul. They were wrong. He had traded it away, piece by piece, years ago. He traded it for the kind of influence that could build a fortress no one could break. And he had built one, high on the mountain slope. It was a sleek, modern structure of steel and stone. It was wrapped in layers of scanners, sensors, and cameras. Their red eyes glowed like angry fireflies in the dusk. From the outside, it was a fortress. From the inside, it felt like a hospital. The air was filtered and cool. The large, empty rooms echoed with a hollow quiet. The only sound was the soft, constant hum of machines. That hum was the soundtrack to Jin-ho's life. The worry here had a weight. It was heavy in the air. It was the home of a man who had conquered a city but could not command a single cell in his children's bodies to behave. Every night he walked through his sterile kingdom. His hands were clasped behind his back. He was a shadow in a house of shadows. He paused longest outside the one room that held all the light and all the fear in his world. The twins' room. Hana and June were 8 years old. They were two halves of a single, fragile heart. They shared the same delicate faces, the same wide, dark eyes. Their eyes held a wisdom far beyond their years, a wisdom born of pain. Their bodies were small castles under constant attack by their own immune systems. The room was both a nursery and an intensive care unit. The walls were pastel, covered with their crayon drawings. But the room was also filled with the sleek, threatening shapes of oxygen machines, IV poles, and monitors. The monitors drew the jagged lines of their breathing. No cost was too high. Specialists from Zurich and Boston flew in on his private jet. Their advice cost more than most houses. Treatments were experimental and exhausting. Jin-ho had once bought an entire biotech company because their research on children's lung disease seemed hopeful. The company failed 2 years later. He did not blink at the loss. Everything was tried. Except hope. Hope was a luxury Jin-ho could not afford. Hope was a distraction. It was a crack in his armor. His love for them was a burning, desperate thing. It was a supernova contained inside a shell of ice. It was also his greatest weakness. In his world, enemies did not attack the front gate. They looked for the secret, crumbling tunnel under the wall. They attacked through what you loved. He had done it himself many times. A rival's daughter blackmailed over a small scandal. A politician's son led into quiet ruin. Love was the universal weakness. Jin-ho was a master of using it. So he trusted no one. The guards who bowed to him could be bribed. The doctors with their polite smiles were hired hands. Their ethics had price tags. The silent staff who cleaned the floors were ghosts who could become knives in the dark. He paid them enormous amounts of money, and he watched them constantly. Fear and greed were the only chains he believed in. His answer was total watchfulness. The mansion was a church of surveillance. Obvious cameras in the corners were for show, a warning. The real network was woven into the very cloth of the place. Tiny lenses in air vents, behind mirrors, hidden in smoke detectors, placed in the leaves of a decorative bonsai tree. Microphones heard every whisper in every room except the bathrooms. Every inch was watched, recorded, and saved in computers buried deep underground. His private room next to his bedroom was the control center. One whole wall was a puzzle of high-definition screens. It was a silent, glowing hive of black and white and green night vision pictures. Here, in the chair that fit the shape of his back, Park Jin-ho would sit for hours. The electronic light cut the severe lines of his face. A king looking over a kingdom of silent dots, searching for the one shake that meant disaster. This was his place of prayer, his vigil, his addiction. It was here, on a night like any other, the rain a soft drum on the glass, that the first strange thing happened. Screen number 12, the twins' room. Hana was caught by a coughing fit. Her small body shook under the blanket. June, always the watchful twin, was instantly awake. His hand found hers. His lips moved in silent, urgent comfort. Jin-ho leaned forward. His body grew tight. A ghost pain squeezed his own chest. He begged her in his mind to stop. He begged the air to go into her lungs. He was powerless. The door opened softly. Grace Williams entered. She was a picture of stillness and efficiency. 3 months before, she had come through a private, discreet agency. The agency served clients who valued secrecy over references. Her file was thin. American, 42, no family, a clean but plain work history. Her Korean was okay, polite, and a little hesitant. It was as if the words were delicate shells she was afraid of breaking. She was black. In the very Korean world of Jin-ho's senior staff, this made her stand out. Yet she carried herself with a quiet pride that made her almost unseen. She kept her eyes down. Her movements were careful. Jin-ho had approved her himself, not because her history was perfect, but because her background was an empty space. He could fill it with his own suspicions. She was a mystery he could watch and control. A known stranger was, in his mind, safer than a familiar face that could hide a familiar betrayal. On the screen, she moved to Hana's bedside with a nurse's quiet purpose. Her hands, dark against the white sheets, were skilled. She checked the oxygen monitor on Hana's finger. She adjusted the tube under her nose. Jin-ho saw no shaking in her hands. He saw practiced certainty. More than a maid, he thought. Trained. Then she broke from the normal routine. Instead of going back to the watch chair in the corner, the one for the night nurse, she simply sat on the floor. She crossed her legs on the thick rug. She was now at eye level with June, who watched her with careful interest. From the deep pocket of her plain black apron, she pulled out a small, worn book. It had a faded lion on the cover. Jin-ho's brow furrowed. This was not in the job description. Soft feelings are a path for mistakes. She began to read. Her voice, when she used it fully, was a surprise. It was a low, rich sound, warm like poured honey. It had a musical rhythm that softened the edges of her accented Korean. She read a line in English. The little lion's mane felt flat in the darkness, for courage needs light to grow. Then, slowly, carefully, Ko yonkinun enos, ko pichi enos, ko isaya enos, ko chiteniki enos, ko temune enos, ko adum enos, ko sakes enos, ko chahun enos, ko sadu enos, ko gukinun enos, ko chuk enos, ko nudadyat enos. June's worried body relaxed a little. Hana's coughing calmed into rough, listening breaths. The constant beep of the monitor seemed to slow, to calm. A strange, uncomfortable pressure built behind Jin-ho's breastbone. It was a feeling both foreign and upsetting. He ignored it. He told himself it was the late hour and the constant, low-grade fear of being a father. The story was simple, a tale about fear and finding inner light. When she finished, she closed the book. Then she did something that made Jin-ho's jaw tighten on its own. She prayed. Not a loud chant, but a whisper so private the sensitive microphones barely heard it. She held Hana's small hand in both of hers. Her head was bowed not in surrender, but in focused talk. Our Father, let this one breathe a little easier tonight. Let her brother's heart be calm. And let the one who watches find rest, too. Jin-ho froze, the one who watches. The pressure in his chest became a hard knot. Was it a general wish, or did she somehow know? He pushed the thought away as paranoia, but the seed was planted. He hated prayer. It was the language of the powerless dealing with an absent landlord. It reminded him of his mother's whispers in a cold, bare room when he was a boy. Promises to a silent heaven that were never kept. A hope that had died long before she had. He watched Grace leave. The room settled back into its rhythmic hum. The twins' monitors showed steadier, calmer lines. He sat back, making his shoulders relax. A harmless habit, he told himself, maybe even useful for obedience. Comfort is a tool. But the next night, he found himself ignoring other screens. He focused only on number 12 before he even knew what he was doing. Again, the routine. The medicine, the tucking in, the smoothing of blankets. This time, the book was about a bear who couldn't sleep. And then, Grace sang. It was a lullaby, the words English, the melody something old and sad. It was woven from the deep American South and something fundamentally African. It was a spiritual tune that spoke of rivers and deep roots. Hush, little one, don't you cry. Mama's gonna sing you a lullaby. The river may be wide, the current deep and strong, but love's the boat that carries you along. Jinho did not understand the words, but he understood the language. It was the language of home, of a lullaby his own mother might have sung in a different, kinder life. A life that didn't demand ice instead of blood. On the monitor, Hana's lips, usually pressed thin with effort or fear, curved into the faintest ghost of a smile in her sleep. June's eyelids grew heavy. His grip on his sister's hand loosened from a desperate hold to a friendly touch. Jinho's own hand gripped the leather armrest. The material protested. The doctors managed sickness. The nurses managed numbers. This woman, this stranger, was managing fear. She was putting a soothing cream on a wound his money and power could not even find. It was a closeness he had never allowed. He had never known how to give it. He had perhaps feared it more than any physical threat. It felt like a breaking of his carefully ordered world, and yet it looked like a gift. The conflict in his mind was maddening. The third night was the turning point. A sudden, violent thunderstorm beat against the mountainside. It was a rage of nature that laughed at man's security. With a world-splitting crack of lightning that turned the screens white for a second, the power died. The mansion was thrown into a roaring, wind-beaten blackness. The backup machines started within seconds. But in those 3 minutes of total darkness and screaming wind, Hana woke in pure animal terror. A choked cry was lost in the boom of thunder. Her asthma, started by the sudden pressure change, the dust from the vents, and her own eating fear, closed like a trap. The monitor, as power returned, screamed to life, a sharp, constant signal of panic as her oxygen level fell into the red. Jinho was out of his chair before he knew he was moving. His heart was a wild, frantic drum against his ribs. He was already walking fast toward the door, a cold sweat on his neck, when his eyes, trained by a lifetime of looking for danger, flicked back to the screen. Grace was already there. She did not panic. She did not call for help first, that would come seconds later. In the strange green glow of the return night vision feed, her movements were a lesson in disaster met with grace. She moved through the crisis, not around it. She lifted Hana upright. One arm was a firm support behind the child's back. The other hand was cupped, tapping gently but firmly between her small shoulder blades in an exact, rhythmic pattern. Her lips moved, counting. 1, 2, 3. Her face showed not worry, but fierce, total focus. A sculptor facing a block of marble. Hana's struggling began to ease. The terrible, high whistling in her breath softened to a wet rattle, then to a gasp. Grace held her close, rocking gently. Her chin rested on the child's sweat-damp hair. "It's okay," she murmured, over and over a mantra. "It's okay, you're here, you're so strong." Then she turned her head. She looked right at June. He was sitting straight up, sheets held in white-knuckled fists. Tears of pure fear streaked his face. "You too," she said. Her voice was firm, an anchor in the storm. "You too, both of you are so strong." She paused. Her next words dropped into Jinho's soul like stones into a frozen lake, cracking the surface. "Like your father." The room on the screen blurred. Jinho's blood turned to ice, then to fire, then back to ice. No one mentioned him to them, ever. He was father, a distant, stern shape who visited. His voice made the nurses stand straight. His presence was felt but rarely understood. He was a source of awe and confusion. He was not a standard for strength and weakness. The comparison, the link of his seen, iron strength to their fragile, bodily fight, was a wrong that shook him to his core. Was it a trick? A slow poison meant to tie their liking for her to a twisted respect for him? Or was it a seeing of something he himself never saw? The crisis passed. The head nurse and the on-call doctor arrived. It was a storm of white coats and worried faces. Grace smoothly went back to her role. She gave short medical facts. It started with the lightning, her ribs were pulling, she responded to tapping, before fading into the background. She became a still, dark figure by the window while the professionals took over. But the hook was set deep in Jinho's mind. The strange thing had a pattern. The pattern had purpose. The next day, he started phase 2, not the normal background check, but a digging up. He gave the job to his most quiet digital digger, a pale, silent man named Kim. Kim lived in a room with no windows full of computers. He knew how to find the ghosts in the machine, the data that wanted to stay buried. "Find the bones," Jinho ordered. His voice was quiet but with a new, grim tone. "Not what she wants us to see. Find what she's buried. Find the wound." The official file stayed stubbornly clean, a masterpiece of simple fake history. But the pattern of her life, traced through money records and digital crumbs, was telling. A modest, regular salary from her past jobs in private healthcare in America. No fancy spending. A single, unchanging monthly wire transfer, always the same amount, sent without fail for the last 15 years. Its destination, the Severance Hospital in Busan. Not to a general fund, not to a research group. To a specific, named department, the Pediatric Respiratory Recovery and Long-Term Care Ward. Busan, the word was a tripwire in Jinho's memory. He knew its busy ports, its deep criminal groups, its layered, violent past. A cold, sick feeling began to turn in his gut. It was the start of a moral sickness he hadn't felt in years. He got into older, city-kept records. He pulled files from 15 years ago, ignoring computer walls with a practiced ease. There was an incident. A major fire, in an older wooden part of that very hospital. It was set to be destroyed, but was still partly used for storage and a few long-term patients. The news reports were clinical, short. Electrical fault. Tragic accident. 7 dead. The old wing, a leftover, was a total loss. The social fire, however, the one that burned in the street food tents and online forums, whispered a different story. A fight over territory between two small crews under larger, more sophisticated groups, one of them the Jumgangpa, indirectly under Jinho's wide influence at the time. A thrown firebomb meant for a rival's parked car had gone through an open ground floor window of the old wing. The resulting fire, fed by old papers and wooden beams, had been a catastrophe. Unofficially, the blood debt, through the complex, twisting lens of connection and blame, was his. The Jumgangpa worked under his peace. Their violence was a tax he indirectly collected. His digger, Kim, brought him the final, destroying piece, saved security video. It was grainy and hellish from a traffic camera across the street. The data was pulled from a police computer backup thought to be erased. The images were broken, chaotic flames licking out of windows, people running. And then he saw her, a younger Grace. Her hair was coming out of a practical bun. Her face was a mask of soot and complete ruin. She was not running from the fire. She was running toward it, toward the smoke pouring from a broken window on the first floor. A nurse in scrubs was physically trying to hold her back, arms wrapped around her waist. Grace fought free with a strength born of madness, of love. The next clip from a different, farther angle showed her stumbling out minutes later. Her clothes were smoking. Her arms held a small, blanket-trapped bundle against her chest. Her face, in that moment, a landscape of pure, basic agony and determination, was burned into Jinho's sight. He would see it in his sleep. Matching the hacked patient list with the fire department's casualty list confirmed it. The only child patient in that wing was a 6-month-old boy, Isaiah Williams. He was there for chronic bronchiolitis and failure to grow. He was the son of Grace Williams, a single mother working as a hospital cleaner while taking nursing classes at night. The child had been saved, suffering from severe smoke damage to his lungs. He died 2 days later in the modern ICU. His tiny, injured lungs could not recover. The screen went dark. Jinho sat in the humming silence of his control room. The only light was the reflected, indifferent glow from the city he owned. He felt outside his body. The carefully filtered air grew thin, poisonous. Here was the consequence. It was no longer an abstract idea in a book of moral debt. It was given flesh and name and a gentle voice that sang lullabies in the night. He had not thrown the bottle. He had not even ordered the fight. But the system of controlled violence he grew, the atmosphere of no punishment he gave to those below him, had created the conditions for that random, stupid spark. He was the author of that chaos. The blood debt, in the book he now made himself read with clear eyes, was without question his. And she knew, she had to know, The agency she came through was too perfect. The path to his door was too smooth. She had walked through the gates of hell and into the lion's den, not for a salary, but for a settling of accounts. To look the devil in the eye. Yet on the screens that were his reality, she comforted his children. She calmed his daughter's terror with hands that had held her own dying son. She called his son strong, using the same voice that had likely begged to God for Isaiah's breath. The conflict in his mind was paralyzing. Was this the long plan? A revenge so perfect, so patient, it would involve winning his trust, becoming essential, before destroying what he loved most from a position of intimate access. Or was it something else? Something his soul, long used to the simple math of betrayal and loyalty, could not immediately understand. The next week was a time of exquisite, soul-tearing tension. Jinho watched her every move with a new, painful sharpness. He looked for the sign, the mistake, the moment the mask would fall. Instead, he saw only deepening realness. He saw her endless patience when June, angry at his own weakness, threw his medicine spoon across the room. She didn't scold. She simply picked it up, washed it, sat beside him on the bed, and told him a story. It was about a turtle who won a race not by being fast, but by being steady. By knowing that slow forward movement was still forward movement. He saw her real, changing smile, a light that broke across her face like sunrise, when Hana, with great ceremony, gave her a clumsily drawn picture of a lion with a big, pink mane. "It's you," Hana whispered. "Because you're brave." Grace had framed it with 2 pieces of cardboard. She hung it on the wall next to a Van Gogh print. He saw her, one quiet afternoon, simply sitting by the window with a sleeping Hana in her lap. Her cheek rested on the child's head. Her eyes were closed, not in sleep, but in what looked like a deep, tired connection. A moment of stolen peace. There was no ill will, no hidden moves, no secret messages, only a constant, unchanging tenderness. It was slowly, permanently healing the very air of the room itself. It was a form of mind war for which he had no defense, no counterplan. She was taking apart his fortress not with force, but with a relentless, quiet love. The storm that finally broke the deadlock was both weather and physical. A typhoon, named by the weather people but feeling biblical in its anger, moved near the Korean coast. It sent early bursts of its rage into Seoul. The mansion groaned and shook under the attack of the wind. The power, this time, failed for a full, frightening 3 minutes before the backup machines choked and started. The sudden, total darkness and the world-ending scream of the wind were too much for Hana's fragile system. The panic attack started a lung spasm more severe than any before. Jinho, already on a sharp edge from the weather, saw her body signs spiral on the monitor into a solid red zone of crisis. He ran. He ran past surprised guards who moved to get out of his way. His own breath was rough in his throat. The cold, ancient fear he'd spent a lifetime holding down was now a geyser. It froze and burned him from the inside out. He burst into the room to a scene of controlled chaos. The head doctor, Dr. Lee, was shouting orders. A nurse was preparing a shot. Alarms screamed. And in the center of the storm, Grace was on the bed. Hana was limp and blue in her arms, but she wasn't using the hospital's modern, approved breathing machine. She had a small, old-fashioned handheld inhaler. Its plastic case was yellowed with age. A small pink teddy bear sticker was half scratched off its side. It was pressed to Hana's face with a soft mask. "What is that?" Jinho's voice cut through the noise. It was colder and sharper than the wind-driven needles of rain hitting the windows. "Where did you get that? It's not on the approved list. It's not clean." Grace didn't jump. She didn't even look at him. She kept her eyes locked on Hana's face. Her hand held the mask steady with a tenderness that hid the urgency. Only when the child took a shaking, deeper breath, a faint hint of color returning to her lips, did she look up. She met his gaze. In her eyes was no fear of his authority, no fight, only a deep, tired sorrow that seemed to hold oceans. "I brought it with me," she said. Her voice was barely heard over the storm and the screaming monitors, yet it carried perfectly to him. "From America, from a long time ago. I prayed to a God I'm sometimes very angry with that I would never, ever have to use it." The truth exploded in the room. It was the inhaler from another life, from a hospital in Busan. The one she had used for her own son, Isaiah, a leftover of a lost love, now pressed to the lips of his child. The world shrank to that single, unbearable point of connection. The medical team, after a stunned second, saw the medicine was working. The crisis was being handled. They stepped back, watching. Their eyes were wide with a mix of professional relief and human confusion. Hannah's chest began to rise and fall in a more regular, if still difficult, rhythm. The storm outside raged, but the storm inside was passing. It left only the wreckage of pretenses and the shaking aftermath. An hour later, the mansion was quiet but for the sighing wind and the drip of rainwater. Summoned, Grace stood before him in his study. The city lights below were like drowned stars in a black sea. He stood by the window, his back to her, gathering the broken pieces of his calm, his emperor's mask. "You know who I am," he stated. His voice was flat, empty of all feeling. "Yes, Park SSI, I do. You know what I have done, what my world caused, what I am to blame for." A pause filled with the memory of fire. "Yes, I know. You could have hurt my children." He turned now. His face was pale and stark in the dim light. "You could have let her fall tonight, a delayed reaction, a small mistake in the darkness. It would have been easy, it would have been fitting." He forced the next words out. "Why didn't you?" Grace stood straight. Her hands were clasped lightly in front of her. The maid's apron was gone. She wore a simple, dark blue dress. She looked like what she was, a woman who had stared into the heart of the deepest loss and had not broken but had been reshaped by it. She swallowed. For the first time in his presence, he saw the shine of tears she would not let fall. A diamond-bright hardness was in her eyes. "'Cause," she began. Her voice was thick with a grief that was still fresh after 15 years. "A man ran into a fire for my boy, a complete stranger. He was a cleaner in the new wing, an old Korean man with a bad knee and grandchildren of his own. He heard me screaming. He saw the window. He went in before the firefighters even arrived." She took a shaky breath, steadying herself. "He brought Isaiah out. He was on fire himself. He died 2 weeks later in the burn unit. He never woke up. He didn't know us. He didn't ask who we were or if we were worthy. He just saw a child in the fire." Jinho felt the floor tilt under him. The story was a mirror held up to his own soul. The reflection was monstrous. "I came here full of anger," she continued. Her eyes now held his. She forced him to bear witness, to not look away from the ruin. "A black, bitter thing I carried in my chest for 15 years. It was heavy as a stone. I wanted to see the face of the man whose carelessness took my heart. I wanted to look into the eyes of the creature who could build a palace on so much pain and sleep soundly in it. And," the word was a rough sound, scraped from a dry throat. She looked at him. She truly looked at him. Past the tailored suit, the power, the legend. Her expression softened into something that was not forgiveness. Forgiveness was too cheap, too easy, but a devastating. Understanding clarity. "I saw a father," she said quietly. Each word was a deliberate drop of water wearing away stone. "A man who walks empty halls at 3 a.m., a man who watches shadows on a screen because he's too afraid to close his eyes. He's terrified that if he does, love will slip away from him in the silence. I saw the fear in your eyes when you look at them, the same fear I felt. I saw a man in a prison of his own making. It has thicker walls and darker shadows than I ever knew. You are. Perhaps more afraid than I ever was." Something shattered in Park Jinho then. A dam of endless winter, carefully kept for decades, broke. He did not weep loudly. It was a silent, violent shaking. A storm of shame, grief, regret, and a horrifying, freeing recognition tore through him. He turned back to the window. His shoulders shook. The tears fell freely, hot and shameful. They cut tracks through the stone of his face. He cried for Isaiah Williams. He cried for the nameless cleaner whose face he would now search for in his own records. He cried for Hannah and June and their fragile, stolen breaths. He cried for the soul he had traded away piece by piece. It was now screaming to be taken back from the cold account books of his empire. Grace did not move to comfort him. She did not offer easy words. Her mercy, in that moment, was in her steadfast witness. It was in her refusal to offer a forgiveness he had not earned and she could not give. When the storm within him had calmed to rough tremors, when he could speak again, he kept his back to her. His voice was raw. "What do you want? Name it. Money, a new name, a life anywhere in the world." He heard her shift slightly. "I want to finish my job," she said. Her voice was simple, firm. "They need me. The doctors know medicine. I know this." She meant the fear, the loneliness of the sick room, the quiet vigil. "And," she hesitated, then finished. I think you need me to finish it too, not for you, for them. The next morning, in the clean, cold, washed light of day after the storm, Park Jin-ho walked into his control room. He stood before the wall of living images. It was the kingdom he had built on fear and suspicion. He saw the guard moving his feet at the gate, bored. He saw the cook tasting the soup for the twins. He saw the empty, sunlit hallway. A dust mote danced in a beam of light. He reached for the master panel. It was a bank of switches and dimmers that controlled his world. With a series of soft, sure clicks, he began turning them off. Screen number 1, the main gate. The image vanished into black. Screen number 7, the kitchen, dark. Screen number 22, the grand hall, dark. Screen number 15, the east corridor, dark. One by one, the screens winked into nothingness. Each click was a small death, a small birth. The black squares reflected back his own face, tired, lined, older than he remembered. But his eyes held a new, uncertain, strangely open light. The last screen alive was number 12, the twins' room. The morning sun streamed in. Grace was there, sitting in the armchair now. A book was open. June was leaning against her arm, following the words. Hana, propped up with pillows, her color better, was slowly tracing the pictures with a finger. There was a bowl of peeled apple slices on the bedside table, a scene of ordinary, deep peace. Jin-ho watched the living scene for a long, quiet moment. He memorized it, the tilt of Grace's head, the focus on June's face, the faint smile on Hana's lips. Then he took a breath and clicked the final switch. The room went dark and quiet. The constant, background hum of the computers faded into silence. He stood in the sudden stillness. The absence of electronic eyes felt like a physical weight lifted from his shoulders. The taking apart of the empire was not a war. It was a carefully managed, strategic step back. It was done with the same exactness he had used to build it. Good deals were sold to old rivals at a lower price. It was a form of profitable peacemaking. Areas were quietly given to ambitious underlings. It created a web of thankful, distracted powers. The complex money networks, fake companies, overseas trusts were slowly, patiently unwound. The money was moved into legal businesses, a children's hospital charity, a clean energy startup. He became a ghost in his own story. He faded from the whispers. He allowed new stories to fill the empty space. The mansion's physical security stayed, old habits died hard, but its soul went through a revolution. The cameras were physically taken out. The control room was stripped and changed into a sun-filled room full of plants. Here, Hana could do her breathing exercises in the light. The fear in the air was slowly replaced, not with foolish trust, but with a careful, hard-won normal life. Grace stayed, not as a maid. She became their teacher, their main nurse, their tutor in English and caring. She was their guide in the ways of softness and love without conditions. She argued with Jin-ho about treatment plans. Her fearlessness came from a moral right he could never question. Slowly, carefully, they built a fragile peace, not as friends, and certainly not as a couple, but as two hurt generals from opposite sides of the same terrible war. They had called a stop to fighting. They shared a trench, a no-man's land of shared duty and shared grief, for the sake of the innocents in their care. They spoke little of the past, but its presence was acknowledged in a look, in a shared moment of watching the children sleep. One afternoon, a year later, Jin-ho found Grace in the sunroom. She was repotting a fern. Hana was napping. June was at a tutoring session. The cleaner, Jin-ho said quietly. The word hung in the sunlit air. His name was Park Di-woong. He had 2 daughters. I've taken care of their education. Their children's futures, it's nothing, but it's done. Grace's hands stilled in the soil. She didn't look up for a long time. Then she nodded just once. A single, sharp dip of her chin. No thanks were given, none were needed. It was an entry in a book only they two would ever see. A line drawn not to settle the account, but to admit it existed. Years later, on a spring morning covered with cherry blossom confetti, the air sweet with the smell of magnolia and damp earth, Jin-ho stood on the terrace. The fortress gates below were often open now. They let in the breeze and the sound of playing children from the nearby houses. In the garden below, Hana and June were now 12. They had a healthy, strong glow to their cheeks. It spoke of stronger lungs and countless hours in the sun. They were chasing a brilliant yellow butterfly. Their laughter, clear and without burden, rang like crystal bells in the clean air. Hana, longer-legged now, was leading the chase. June, always the planner, was trying to circle ahead. Grace stood a few steps away on the terrace. She held a mug of tea. A small, contented, and still somewhat surprised smile was on her face as she watched them. The lines around her eyes were deeper, but they were lines of sun and expression, not just of sorrow. Jinho watched too, not through a screen, not through a lens of paranoia and control, but with his own eyes. He felt the warm sun on his skin. He felt the solid stone of the railing under his hands. He felt the huge, almost too much weight of the piece that had settled in his chest. It was a heavy weight, but it was the weight of something real, something grown, not built. The silence that surrounded him now was not the silence of power. It was the deep, humming silence of a life being lived. Of breath drawn easily. Of love that no longer needed to be guarded like a state secret or a weakness to be used. He had been the man feared by all of Korea. The whisper in the boardroom. The name that closed investigations. The shadow between the light and the dark. But here, now, watching the sunlight catch in his daughter's dark hair as she spun, laughing, watching his son's triumphant, gap-toothed smile as he pointed at the butterfly now resting on an azalea bush park, Jinho felt something he had never dared dream of. He had never even known to want. He felt the quiet. He felt the sun. He felt, for the first time since he was a child himself, before the world demanded he become stone, simply at peace. It was not an end to grief or memory. It was a fragile, precious agreement with them, and it was enough.